I had a fascinating discussion about sports with a man who was quite averse to women participating in certain sports. However, he absolutely adored the fact that women perform much better in some other sports. Although I did not completely agree with his justifications, some of them were indeed valid, which made me curious to understand how other men perceive this topic. Story 1. Serena Williams has spoken about the difference. She is well aware she would lose to a middle-tier professional male. There are differences between men and women, and that's okay. Our value remains the same regardless of these differences. Story 2. I am not a basketball fan and have not watched much of the women's league, but I imagine it would be a significant difference. Men's players are exceptionally athletic, able to jump high and fast. The Women's National Basketball Association must be a stark contrast. Story 3. Weightlifting is an obvious example. Tennis is another. The best female tennis player ranks 100th at the men's college level and is just slightly above the men's high school level in tennis. She does not compare to the men's professional league. Men are generally stronger, faster, and more durable than women. It is basic biology. Story 4. I am actually more interested in the opposite question. Which sports and activities have close to equality between the sexes as top competitors? I am not particularly interested in places where they could compete equally, just in those where they do. The only one I know of is competitive jigsaw puzzles, but there are surely others. Story 5. The Arsenal women's football team lost 5-0 to the under-15 boys, and the Australian national team lost 7-0 to a group of 15-year-olds. They are not the only two teams to suffer a similar fate. There is a stark difference between men's and women's football, and I am fairly sure most Saturday League teams in the UK, whether semi-professional or high-level amateur, would at least give them a run for their money. Story 6. It is difficult to determine. However, weightlifting typically shows the most significant differences in raw numbers immediately. This can also be observed in an amateur gym. Even a slim, untrained individual can usually lift more than the average well-trained woman. Various factors contribute to this, including body weight, muscle composition, and bone structure. Story 7. I know people may not want to hear it, but you could include basketball on the list. Caitlin Clark is fantastic. She would not perform well even in the Big Three league, which is likely why she hasn't taken that deal. She understands that the risk is not worth it, and she earns more from endorsements anyway. Her being outmatched by semi-retired male players would undermine all the work she has done for women's basketball, where she has performed remarkably. The older female players criticizing her should reconsider. She has the potential to increase their earnings. However, the difference in athleticism between the Women's National Basketball Association champions and a decent male high school team is significant. It's a completely different sport. Story 8. Weightlifting is an obvious example, as well as rugby. However, I believe rowing is a sport where men may have an advantage. Story 9. It is largely the same disparity throughout. It is much easier to list the sports in which women excel, such as Olympic horseback riding disciplines, particularly in recent years. Story 10. Pole vaulting and gymnastics are influenced by the physics of biological differences. Men have a significant advantage in pole vaulting, while women have a greater advantage in tumbling. This is an interesting observation. Story 11. Football. The speed and agility in every move highlight the differences in what male goalkeepers can achieve. Some mentioned mixed martial arts, which can be interesting to me. There is significant stamina, strength, and technique involved. I'm not suggesting that female footballers lack technique. They certainly know how to handle the ball. However, watching a women's football match can be challenging for me. It's the overall experience. It might be preferable if we could agree that women play on smaller fields than men. Even at lower levels, men's leagues tend to be more engaging. Story 12. Surprised no one has mentioned the advantage women have in ultra-long distance running and endurance sports. Story 13. There is a reason why men and women do not compete in the same leagues. You can see it at all levels of sports: high school, college, and professional. Story 14. I believe that sports are subjective in nature. For example, men's sense of balance is located in their shoulders, while women's sense of balance is found in their hips. In gymnastics, the competition categories are entirely different for both genders. If a man were to perform on the parallel bars, he might fall flat, whereas if a woman were to compete in shot put against a man, she would likely lose. Interestingly, we are now discovering that, since women's sense of balance is in their hips, they are becoming increasingly proficient in board sports such as skateboarding, snowboarding, and surfing, which were traditionally seen as male-dominated sports. It's a positive development for them. Story 15, mixed martial arts for sure. It's unbelievable that people thought Ronda Rousey would have competed with any male fighter in the 135-pound category in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Story 16, he absolutely adored the fact that women perform much better in some sports. What are these sports in which women perform better? Story 17. Quality or performance? There's a significant performance gap in tennis, but I actually prefer the quality of the women's game, where it focuses less on brute force. The same is true for volleyball. However, women's hockey and basketball are generally less competitive versions of the men's sports. Story 18. Boxing. Bone density and fast-twitch muscle fibers favor males. Women's competitions may be more competitive, and the mentality is equally competitive, but not when facing men. Story 19. All physical sports come to mind. For cerebral sports like chess, I doubt there is much difference. I am curious to know more, though. Story 20. Basketball is undoubtedly different. The pace, playstyle, ball size, and court dimensions are unique to the sport. Many people do not realize that the National Basketball Association is not the Men's National Basketball Association. It is open to both men and women. However, only one woman was drafted into the National Basketball Association, and that was many years ago. She never actually played in a real game. The Women's National Basketball Association was partially created to provide women with an opportunity to play at the professional level, as this rarely occurred naturally. The Women's National Basketball Association is largely subsidized by the National Basketball Association and cannot exist without it. This fact alone speaks volumes. The National Basketball Association is technically a co-ed league, while the Women's National Basketball Association is exclusively for women. In contrast, climbing is one of the few sports where women can actually perform better than men, and some of the world's best are both men and women. It is probably the most equitable sport I have ever seen for both genders competing. Some may say that men and women compete separately in climbing. While this is true, I have witnessed both men and women climbing at the same high level, with women sometimes outperforming men and vice versa. It goes both ways. Story 21. Olympic weightlifting. What really puts this into perspective is the fact that the probably greatest lifter ever, Naim Suleimanoglu, set a world record in the clean and jerk at 190 kilograms while weighing only 60 kilograms. Meanwhile, the woman Li Wenwen, who is also one of the greatest lifters, clean and jerked 187 kilograms while weighing around 150 kilograms. Story 22. I would say gymnastics. There are two disciplines that exist for men but do not exist for women: the pommel horse and the rings. This is primarily due to strength. Story 23. Strength and combat sports are closely related. While women's powerlifting has been achieving impressive numbers in recent years, it is rare to see a female bench press over 500 or 600 pounds raw, nor is a 1,000-pound deadlift common. This point illustrates the clear advantage strength has in combat sports, assuming a competent skill level. Given the choice, most people would prefer to take a punch from a 150-pound highly skilled female fighter rather than a 150-pound moderately skilled fighter. A 200-pound bench press is an impressive achievement for a female athlete and typically requires years of training to accomplish. In contrast, an untrained and unathletic 15-year-old male can often reach a 200-pound bench press within 3 months with a proper training program. Story 24. This is such an interesting topic because it forces us to acknowledge that men and women are simply different, despite the insistence from some groups that this is not the case. Certain sports, you would think, have no differences for men and women, such as bowling. There are the same lanes and the same pins, and each player uses their own equipment. However, even recognized bowling organizations acknowledge that men's averages and scores tend to be better due to strength and ball revolution. Other sports, like basketball, change the ball and scoring dimensions, such as the three-point line, while the basket remains the same. Volleyball changes the net height. Golf uses separate tees, with the Ladies Professional Golf Association typically playing setups that are shorter than those of the Professional Golfers Association. Softball uses a bigger ball, a smaller field, and different rules. I'm not sure what my point is, but it's almost never an apples-to-apples comparison. Yet, some consider it misogynistic when the public does not show overwhelming interest in watching women's sports. Story 25. I believe any competitive one-on-one sports, such as combat sports and tennis, showcase differences in performance. Even when accounting for weight, men tend to be stronger and faster on a pound-for-pound basis. Much of this also depends on how high up the skill curve we go. I can observe more upsets when both competitors are less skilled compared to when they are highly skilled. In team sports, two major examples that stand out to me are soccer and basketball. In basketball, the significant height advantage for men in the top performance tier is very noticeable. In soccer, I have observed and experienced anecdotal evidence suggesting there is a substantial gap in speed and power even at a young age. Story 26. Combat. Wrestling, hand-to-hand martial arts, and similar disciplines. At a general non-competitive level, it is fine. However, as you progress, the differences become immense, and due to the nature of these activities, there is much more potential for injury. Unlike activities without an opponent in direct confrontation, you have more at stake in this situation. Due to submission holds or binds, the pressure increases. Some may not have direct submission holds, but they may lead to increased pressure that could result in a broken bone or dislocated joint. In these scenarios, you may expose your back or sustain an injury. Story 27. In almost all sports, professional women athletes are approximately at the talent level of high school boys. Story 28. It has to be mixed martial arts. Of course, National Football League football and basketball would also be among the top, but you cannot compare a male fighter in mixed martial arts to a female fighter. Story 29. Any sport that requires prolonged speed, strength, and concentration. Ask professional athletes. There's a reason men and women are not in the same leagues. It's because they are not in the same league physically either. Story 30. Mixed martial arts, even the quality of a vast majority of women's mixed martial arts fights, heavily lack technique. I do not understand how this is possible, but it is the case. Women's mixed martial arts is rarely exciting, maybe 1 out of 10 fights, and it is seldom technical from both fighters. Typically, the fights are either extremely one-sided or both fighters perform poorly. In contrast, I would say closer to 7 out of 10 men's fights are exciting, and they are usually significantly more technical except for heavyweights who often lack technique but compensate with power. Story 31. What do you mean by difference in quality? That's not necessarily a question of which gender is better at the sport. Men are faster than women, but I would say the quality as a spectator for track and field is the same for both. I don't care if the women are slower than the men. The enjoyment I get from watching is the same. The gap in quality between the National Basketball Association and the Women's National Basketball Association is significant. Their level of performance is different for sure. It's almost like they are purposefully performing poorly in the Women's National Basketball Association for comedic effect. But the experience as a spectator is lacking as well. They sometimes use an unfavorable over-the-backboard camera angle. The floor is painted unusual colors. The stadiums are often quite empty, and the teams seem uncoordinated as if they haven't practiced together much. I watch women's college basketball, and it is equally enjoyable to watch as the men's games, but the Women's National Basketball Association just feels subpar. Story 32. Motorcycle racing has not seen a female rider in the MotoGP or World Superbike Championship for specific reasons. While there are a few names in the supersport class, it becomes increasingly challenging in the 1,000 cubic centimeters category. The level of fitness required to handle a 300 horsepower motorcycle on a racetrack, using body weight to maneuver and control it from speeds of 320 kilometers per hour, is a significant challenge. Story 33. It has sports in its name, so I'm putting it here. The League of Esports is prominent. There was one professional women's team that I think went 1-30 in kills against a male team. The one kill they achieved was because the male team dove under the fountain to secure even more kills. It was not close. I don't understand why, but men seem to perform differently when it comes to video games. Story 34. Mixed martial arts and hockey come to mind right away. The United States and Canada national women's teams typically lose by double digits to junior teams without the junior teams using physical contact. Story 35. Sports that favor endurance position women on the same level as men or potentially higher, while sports that emphasize physical size or strength tend to favor men. It is important to acknowledge the biological differences influenced by puberty. Story 36. Women excel in gymnastics and figure skating. It's not even up for debate. However, if we exclude combat sports like boxing and mixed martial arts from the discussion, there isn't much difference in the quality of events between men and women. Basketball and soccer are essentially the same sport. Regarding combat sports, I spent a lot of my youth boxing, and I must be honest, I've never watched women's boxing. I don't think I would be interested in it, even if I knew where to find it. Story 37. Rock climbing is fairly balanced between genders. Both men and women regularly replicate each other's climbs at the highest levels. Story 38. Powerlifting. The lightest man to exceed the women's world record weighs half her weight, 63 kilograms compared to 135 kilograms. Story 39. It's probably easier to list sports that have little or no difference, at least for physical sports. One cannot deny the physical difference between men and women. Story 40. For me, I believe gymnastics is the most captivating sport. Women are often more graceful than men, but pound for pound, men are phenomenally strong. Women can perform skills that men cannot, while men excel in areas where women may not. Watching men compete on the rings showcases their incredible strength, and women on the uneven bars is truly amazing to witness. Story 41. Most of them? I know chess doesn't even allow transgender females in their female division. In the realm of ultra-long distances such as swimming or running, the top athletes are predominantly women. Story 42. Outside of combat sports, definitely in football, most junior teams would defeat many professional women's teams. Story 43. Almost all track and field events require a combination of speed, strength, and endurance. Athletes train rigorously to enhance their performance and achieve their personal bests. Story 44. Quality? Probably football. The only women's professional American football league that I know of is the Lingerie League, which is quite surprising. However, it is clearly a much lower quality version of the sport compared to the National Football League. Regarding the difference in ability, take weightlifting as an example. There are men at my local gym who can approach the women's world record. My personal record isn't too far off, and I am completely untrained and out of shape, while the men's world record is nearly double that. Story 45. When asking about quality, do you mean there is competition in women's sports and competition in men's sports? Or are you asking if women can be competitive with men? Story 46. Quality and worse version are frustrating terms to hear. Perhaps civilization needs a change because the men posting these demeaning comments contribute to the challenge women face in competing equally with men. I would like to see any of these men compete against any female athlete and not get overwhelmed. Can we not simply appreciate skill regardless of gender? Being a professional athlete requires extensive training, time, meal preparation, and sacrifice. Story 47. I wonder if there are any sports that could be developed where all genders could play competitively with each other without giving anyone an unequal advantage. Perhaps this could even be integrated into the strategy for team sports. I am not sure if there are existing sports that already achieve this. Story 48. Powerlifting, football, mixed martial arts, and bodybuilding have very different judging criteria, making them difficult to compare. Story 49. In football, my untrained eyes seem to notice that women's teams tend to rely more on tactics and strategy, such as trapping the opponent with the ball. Men's teams tend to emphasize speed and brute force. I appreciate both styles, but I prefer watching women play. Story 50. I see many people interpreting this as a head-to-head scenario, as if both sexes were facing each other. However, I interpret your question more in terms of the differences in the spectacle or implementation of the sport. We all know that absolute performance is a consistent result of comparing men's and women's sports, but in practice, the sports appear very similar across most categories. Talent or quality is quite similar when accounting for physical differences and when competing against peers in the same categories. So what's left? Perhaps sports where the venue does not change to accommodate differences in body proportions or physical performance between the two categories of athletes. Some sports do make such accommodations. The net height in volleyball is different for men and women, as is the hurdle height and separation distance in track, along with the pitching mound in softball and baseball. One place this does not happen is basketball, where the height of the rim is the same for both men's and women's games. This results in a difference in play style and the occurrence of dunking. Dunking requires either exceptional jumping ability or height, both of which generally favor men. The ease with which many National Basketball Association players can dunk influences how the game is played, how players develop their skills, and the spectacle of watching. While some Women's National Basketball Association players can dunk, it is far less common, contributing to the characterization of the women's game as having great fundamentals when comparing the two. While this may be a minor difference, I believe it serves as a good example of how the way the game is played notably differs between men and women, even though the sport is otherwise configured to be almost exactly the same. Story 51. Kickboxing. Men tend to be top-heavy, so when they attempt a head kick, they spin all the way around while being off balance and wobbling. In contrast, when a female kickboxer goes for a head kick, her weight is centered in her midsection, allowing her to spin smoothly like a top without wobbling. You can clearly see the difference that physical bodies make. Story 52. Any combat or combative sport includes Greco-Roman wrestling, shot put, javelin throw, boxing, and American football. On the other hand, the most equal sports are those that rely least on raw strength, such as shooting sports and motorsports. Audi's greatest Group B driver, Michèle Mouton, achieved multiple stage and overall wins, and she drove what is still considered the most difficult and untamable series of cars. Story 53. Define quality. Generally, I agree. No woman would agree to fight a man of similar weight or height. Story 54. Esports is an absolutely male-dominated field. The only female world champion I recognize is Li Xiaoming, known as Liyun in Hearthstone. Story 55. What do you mean by the difference in quality? Just because men excel at a sport more than women doesn't mean the quality of the match is superior. Many people refer to mixed martial arts, but I think that is a poor example. There have been numerous low-quality mixed martial arts matches featuring men, while some excellent matches have been held with women. If you define quality in terms of spectator value, I would say American football as the closest equivalent for women is or was the Legends Football League. Story 56. A lot of people are interpreting the question as men versus women. I was considering it more as the quality of sport compared to sport, specifically the quality of an NBA game versus the quality of a WNBA game, not comparing a WNBA player against NBA players. I'm not sure what the right answer is, but I have some thoughts on the other side. I would argue that volleyball and tennis are much more enjoyable to watch when women play due to the volleys rather than just a power serve game. Surprisingly, I enjoy women's college hockey more than men's. The men are bigger, faster, and stronger, but I really appreciate the corner play in women's hockey. It's subtle and more strategic due to the lack of checking, yet there is still plenty of contact. I haven't watched much of the new women's professional hockey that allows checking, so I can't weigh in on that yet, but in the one game I did see, it seemed like an inferior product. Story 57. Mothers, boxing, and similar activities. Women are not weak. Men simply have an advantage in muscle mass and overall strength. I weigh 260 pounds and am chubby. I can still deadlift 150 pounds at work, while most women cannot lift that from an elevated position. Men are generally physically stronger. Story 58. I would also say that many biological women won't even fight if a transgender woman is the opponent. This makes sense. Who would enter a fight knowing they will lose simply due to muscle mass, density, and every other physiological factor against them? That's like a Pinto challenging a Mustang. Story 59. Football. A retirement home in Wrexham clapped the United States women's team 12-0. The United States women's team that won the World Cup couldn't even beat them or a U-15 boys team. Yet they complain about the pay gap. They shouldn't strive to be equal to men's football because it generates billions. Story 60. Anything related to speed or strength will exhibit significant differences. I watched a women's soccer game recently with my dad. It felt like watching slow-motion football. While it was an entertaining match, the pace of the game definitely made it less engaging to watch. Story 61. Rugby. Size, speed, and agility are important. Although it is a team game, it is possible for a team of 7 players to defeat a 15-player women's team. Story 62. Australian rules football is a fierce game. Any woman could be harmed by the men in seconds. Story 63. Regarding tennis, sometimes I feel like the men's game has eclipsed the boundaries of the sport due to their athleticism. Similarly, in professional basketball, where everyone can dunk and shoot three-pointers, the enjoyment seems to diminish. The women's version of these sports appears to be more true to the game, if that makes sense. Story 64. Powerlifting. I am far from winning competitions, but if I were to compete as a woman, even without preparation, I would probably place well, especially as a natural athlete. Story 65. Sports are a significant business. If it generates revenue, the gender of a competitor is irrelevant. Many sports organizations are not segregated by gender, except for women's leagues. When women and men compete against each other and side by side, it is balanced. Separation is typically based on differences in physical ability. Gymnastics is a specific area that illustrates this. Story 66. Sporting values are what matter most. It is challenging to compare athletes because even in the same sports, such as gymnastics and dance, the differences in performance between genders make it difficult to determine who excels in each sport. They participate in the same sport differently. However, in sports where strength and speed provide a clear advantage, such as physical contact sports, sprinting, and tennis, those differences become more noticeable. We should focus on celebrating everyone's involvement in sport and maintaining high standards within those sports. Story 67. There is a good reason why the triathlon has the women's race starting earlier than the men's. There is also a reason men do not compete in synchronized swimming. Story 68. I don't know if it's the biggest issue, but almost everyone I talk to agrees that women's football is boring or poorly played. For me, the difference in sizes and physical capabilities makes the game seem like it is moving at three-quarter speed. Story 69. Sports where you compete against a clock or lift weights involve measuring performance against a standard unit rather than against opponents. For example, in track and field, while racing competitors, you are also racing against the clock. In weightlifting, although you compete against others, you are ultimately competing against the force of gravity. In activities that allow for objective performance measurement, men have historically performed better. Conversely, women tend to excel in skill-based sports. Story 70. My son has been saying that women's college basketball is like watching a junior varsity high school boys team play. That seems harsh to me, but I don't think he is wrong, with certain exceptions. Mostly, watching Caitlin Clark and the Iowa team has been amazing. So, basketball is a clear standout in disparity to me. Story 71. Quality can refer to watchability or athletic ability. This is an important distinction. Many sports, such as women's tennis and women's soccer, are equal in watchability to their men's equivalents, despite having lower athletic ability. Story 72. I was surprised at the dramatic difference in downhill skiing. Apparently, when male and female professional skiers complete the same course, the fastest woman is usually slower than the slowest man. Story 73. Women's tennis is better to watch than men's tennis. The rallies are longer, and there are fewer aces. Winners feel more earned over time through consistency and good shot positioning rather than brute strength. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.